In his preseason news conference announcing him as the Ironbirds' new manager, Matt stressed the word fun, something his father, Boots, ingrained in him. Before every game Matt played, his father would tell him, "Go have some fun." Now, as a manager, he wanted to instill that same belief in his players. He told the press in Aberdeen, "Seeing the kids make progress and feel good about themselves, that's the whole key. This game will let you know how bad you are. Sometimes you need human beings around to remind you how good you are." That's one of my favorite sections from Clubbie, a minor league baseball memoir by Greg Larson. Welcome to Sandlot Social Club. I'm Adam, your host. I play Sandlot baseball for the Cap City Cobras in Austin, Texas. This is the first Sandlot Recommends episode where I'll feature a book, film, or some other piece of baseball art or arcana that I think you might like. Clubbie is a behind-the-scenes look at the world of minor league baseball through the eyes of a team's equipment manager. I chatted with its author, Greg, the eponymous character, about his 2 seasons working for the Aberdeen Ironbirds, how he found himself in a role with such a unique view into the game, and the sometimes tragic, sometimes funny dynamics of a minor league baseball team. How did you come to be the clubby for the Aberdeen Orioles and write this really spectacular baseball memoir with a unique point of view on the game and the way it's played and the people behind the scenes and on the field?
Yeah, I mean, it really started when I was a kid having this dream of wanting to be a professional ball player myself, but not being any good at the game at all. Like growing up in Minnesota and not having any skills at the game. I couldn't hit worth a damn. I was riding the bench in a town and in a state that is not known for baseball, high quality baseball. And yet I still counterintuitively or like illogically still had this dream of being a professional ball player. Got cut from a Division III school, was the equipment manager for a Division I school until I graduated. And when I left college, that was the only job experience I had. And I was like, man, I still love baseball. The story starts with us at Ed Smith Stadium. It's like I get thrown to the wolves in this world where I meet all these minor leaguers and some major leaguers in the Orioles spring training complex on my way up to this job in Maryland. And Ed Smith Stadium is in Southwest Florida. That's where the book starts. And when I was writing or when I was experiencing that, I didn't know that I was inside of a story at that time. I was just living my life after college. Once I got into Aberdeen and I got into that world a little bit, I thought, oh shit, this is going to be, I don't know what this story is exactly, but something interesting is happening here. I didn't know that it was going to be a memoir. I thought that I was going to write some expose about this world that like, look at what minor league baseball is like. It took me a really long time of drafting this book and redrafting it to realize me not making myself the main character of this book would actually be more self-serving.
It sounds like you reworked this a lot since the events that are described in the book. And you mentioned your experience as a child playing baseball and really wanting to be good at baseball, but just kind of not having it happen. You write about that with a real sense of humor. Was that something that kind of developed over time? Did you always have that sense of humor about it?
Oh no. I mean, dude, when that happened, when I was a 19-year-old, I was a 19-year-old freshman at my first Division III college, and I got cut from this team in St. Paul, Minnesota, the Hamlin Pipers baseball team. They didn't want me. They cut me after 48 hours or whatever it was. That was one of the worst things that had happened to me in my entire life at that point. It was a tragic thing. It was like losing my first love. Over time, I've come to realize how ridiculous of a desire it was and the comedy of it, where, that Division III baseball team, I told all of my friends that I got cut from the D3 team, and they responded by saying, I didn't know that Division III sports teams were allowed to make cuts, and they were trying to make me feel better, but it really just insulted me more. It was like I was this NCAA anomaly. So no, I definitely didn't have that sense of humor about it, but I just knew that so much of this book it can be heavy at times. And I know that I can be heavy at times. And we don't see the world as it is. And I didn't see this world as it is. I saw it as I was. And what I was experiencing was this really painful growth. But there's also this sense of humor that it's just this tragic comedy in minor league baseball, where on the team I was working with, one night, our pitching coach called onto the bullpen and said, "Get Jimenez loose." And Jimenez had just left the stadium. He just had disappeared. This whole comedy of errors. Like those moments, that's why I love minor league baseball. But this book gets to show you some of the sadness behind those stories. It's like, that's a crazy story. Why did it happen? Because Enrico Jimenez was worried that he was going to get deported back to the Dominican Republic. So he was trying to escape up to Brooklyn. Like, it's this mix of tragedy and comedy that I think so much of my editing process was trying to navigate that.
You straddle that really well, and there's a really nice balance in the perspective. And since you mentioned Jimenez and the things that go on in minor league baseball, you also have, a unique sort of vantage point into the clubhouse and the dynamics of the clubhouse and kind of what's going on behind the scenes. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that space. You lived there actually for an entire year.
Oh yeah. My second year, I lived in the equipment closet. A lot of the story, I think, takes place in the clubhouse, and it's not as much on the field. I think what's fascinating to me is what's going on behind the scenes with these guys. I connected with the guys who were not very good, like Alex Schmarzo. This dude, he was a 23-year-old veteran. That's a veteran at that level of baseball. And he was struggling to just get moved up. Like, that's all he wanted to do was get moved up to Delmarva and get moved up the Orioles ladder. And he's just stuck there in Aberdeen. That's what fascinated me so much about the guys. Like, I didn't care about guys who were really good. That didn't impress me much, if I can channel Shania Twain a little bit. I think that's what I liked about Schmarzo, is that I could see myself in him, and I could see what would happen if I had lived out all of my dreams. I would be a 48th round draft pick, get a couple of $1,000 signing bonus, and then struggle in short season single A for a couple of years, and then move on with my life. I think that would have been my best case scenario. That's what fascinated me behind the scenes.
Where would that have landed you eventually in your story?
I think I wouldn't have had the writing skills. It's like I would have put so much effort into playing baseball that I would have forgotten about everything else. I would have sacrificed everything for a couple of years of glory.
In some ways, you're trapped in that cycle. If you start doing something like that when you're in middle school and you just do it over and over and over again, that's all you do.
Oh, yeah. Dude, yeah. I mean, even some of the Dominican guys, the rules have changed in the last 2 years. But at that time, Dominican players could get signed the first July after their 16th birthday. And the American guys, they might have a scholarship at a school in the US, but the education that they get isn't necessarily focused on education. They're just there to play ball, a lot of them. And then a tiny percentage of them actually make enough money in Major League Baseball, or minor league baseball for that matter, to like last them the rest of their lives. Like, that's a teeny tiny percentage of players. And then the rest of the guys, they come out the other end of that machine with some amazing experiences. But then asking themselves, the only thing I know how to do is play baseball. Now what? Mm-hmm. That's a big percentage of those guys. A big percentage.
There were a few guys, though, that you touched upon that kind of had other things going on at the same time as they were playing baseball, like starting a business or getting a degree, or like really kind of going full throttle in another area.
Yeah, a couple of guys. Mitch Horacek, I remember he was one guy. He was a Dartmouth guy. He was such an anomaly. He was a dual major at Dartmouth. So this dude would be textbook open on his off days. He'd be studying for classes, and then he would be pitching the next day. That was rare, super rare. Most guys would just coach little kids in the off season to make ends eat.
If you were in charge of the minor league baseball system, what would you add to it that kind of was an antidote to this?
There was a lot of, I will say that Major League Baseball has made some incredible changes in the last couple of years. So they've scaled down completely, which I think is great. They've increased salaries some. There's still, most of the guys make less than 15 grand a year. And these guys simply are not fully compensated for the work and the revenue that they bring in. It doesn't make any sense to me. Those salaries just need to be increased to minimum wage at the very least. And minimum wage needs to include travel time and training time, these parts of their job that are required for them. And a lot of the teams, now they're giving the players housing, which was not the case before. That's so big, dude. they got rid of the dues system. So like, as you know, reading the book, a big part of my
yeah.
compensation was dues. I would charge the players money in exchange for me washing their laundry and feeding them. Big question that nobody asked is like, why are the players obligated to pay for that?
Mhm.
But I benefited from that. I'd scrape the money off the top, and that was my income. That system has been abolished, which I think is fantastic. The only change that I could see making would be to increase salaries to minimum wage at the very least.
When I got to that section of the book, I had a reaction to it, like a bodily reaction, just because it looks really bad.
Yes, a lot of guys there would be these interesting little whispers of conversations about unionization and this kind of thing, but most of the guys know how expendable they are and how many guys there
Mhm.
are behind them in line waiting to take their job.
Right. Yeah.
So nothing really happens.
You mentioned the dues. There was a lot of conflict, internal conflict that you had over that system.
It was crazy because I went in, I thought that I knew the baseball world, but I realized real quickly that I knew nothing about this world at all. It looked familiar to me, but it was a very unfamiliar place. And one of the biggest things was this process of charging dues. My boss, who was kind of my boss, but kind of in charge of in-game promotions, and he was just overseeing me. He suggested I charge $7 a day in dues, which I didn't know. I had no idea what that meant. I had no reference points. And then it was up to me. I was like a debt collector in the clubhouse. I'd go around trying to get guys to pay their dues and at the end of each homestand. And then I would have the front office. I just was swinging deals. And one of the deals was that I would go up to the concession stands and get the leftovers from the concessions after every game and give it to the players. And I'd slip the people in the kitchen a couple of bucks to give it to me. And then the food services guy tried to charge me several $1,000s at the end of the season for taking all those leftovers. I had to have an argument with him, and those dynamics, it felt like I was caught in between the Orioles front office, our front office, the clubhouse, the players, the coaches, and it was up to me to navigate all of these. I mean, if you need somebody who's like a project manager, hire a former clubbie, dude, because we have to manage all these different personalities and assuage different people and just swing deals. It taught me a lot about sales. I didn't even realize it until this last summer promoting the book that I learned a ton about sales as a clubhouse attendant. I mean, look, dude, it was one of the best experiences of my life, but 2 summers was all I needed.
Yeah. The book is just 2 seasons long, and it pivots in the middle. The environment and the culture, very different the first season on the team than the second season. The new manager, Marullo, he says this thing when he becomes the new manager about how sometimes you just need somebody to tell you you're good enough. You need another human being to tell you you're good enough. And he kind of brings that mentality to the clubhouse. And that felt like a shift that really captured a change in the dynamics between the players and how that came out on the field.
So our first season, we're cellar dwellers. Our manager was a major league veteran, which is unusual at that level. Usually the managers only have some minor league experience. And it was just it was not a good environment. Then all of a sudden we come back for the second season. We have this new manager. In his opening press conference, somebody asked him what his mentality was in the clubhouse or how he's going to treat managing a team full of some teenagers and young guys. He said, this game will always let you know how bad you are, but sometimes you need people around to let you know how good you are. And I love that. He's basically saying, I know how much failure is inherent in the game of baseball. Mm-hmm. Baseball is a game of failure. Marullo, his whole demeanor and his ability, he coached a lot of kids. And so he had this really light touch with the guys, and he was really encouraging in that culture. I mean, some of the coaching staff that year would sleep in the clubhouse too. So we'd have these damn sleepovers, and we'd just be like pounding Budweisers, hanging out in the cages, smoking stogies. I mean, it was just, I don't know that the talent was any better. That's not true. We did have really talented. We had Trey Mancini on that team, Mike Yastrzemski, who now plays for the Giants, and a couple other guys who went on to the major league level. But what made a bigger difference was the fact that Matt Marullo just had this really positive attitude coming into the clubhouse. And that made all the difference in the world, it seemed. Easy for me to say. I have a bias because I was in the clubhouse. I would be more inclined to have a bias for clubhouse culture having an impact as opposed to just raw talent on the field, just because I happen to be in the clubhouse. But I still think it had a big impact.
it has to have an impact in that setting, right? Minor league baseball, where like winning and losing, like the games is sort of part of the equation, right? It's part of how you feel about it, but there's all this other stuff going on too, right? So, it's not even, it's a very complicated emotional space for a player.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, like winning and losing doesn't really matter that much. A perfect example, that at the end of that season, we were in the hunt for a playoff position for the first time in the team's history, and we had our team was the only team in the Orioles organization that was still playing, other than the Orioles. And so the Orioles, Zach Britton, he had just finished a really shitty start to end his season. And Buck Showalter, the Orioles manager at the time, didn't want him to end his season with such a sour taste in his mouth. And he was going to send Zach Britton to us to pitch so that he could get a good outing in before he went into the offseason. And our coaching staff was like, fuck that. We don't want him. We'd rather have one of our guys going on the mound to win this game to get into the playoffs than fucking Zach Britton coming in to pitch 2 innings. If he can't throw balls in Major League Baseball, or if he can't throw strikes in Major League Baseball, he can't throw strikes in short season single A. So that was one of those where it was very obvious what we were to this organization. Us going for a championship, nobody gives a fuck except for the people in that clubhouse. All they care about is using us as a means to develop their talent, which makes sense. But it was really stark. That reality was really stark in that interaction. And it turned out that we never did get Zach Britton, and we did go to the playoffs.
You don't want some ringer showing up to your game and just decide, just kind of stepping on the field and being like, I'm playing now. I wouldn't like that either if I was just playing a game in a park, honestly.
Well, in that scenario, he wouldn't have even been
right.
The whole argument was like, he's not even a ringer. He's coming from Major League Baseball and he's just struggling his ass off. He's just this outsider coming in.
Right.
Yeah, it is kind of like the park mentality of like, who's this new guy?
I wanted to talk a little bit about the equipment of baseball, since you were pretty close to it. Baseballs in particular are a piece of equipment that just comes up often in the book, like finding good baseballs, having good baseballs. And there's this one scene that stood out to me, and somewhere in the middle, and there's these kids and they're chasing down fly balls, and you kind of have this shift of perspective. You're like going after the baseballs. So I wonder if you can talk to me a little bit about that. And baseballs and your job and that aspect of it.
Yeah, it felt like a constant struggle between me and the Orioles organization to get damn baseballs for our professional baseball team. It was like the Orioles would only send me a pittance of baseballs. You need about 6 dozen baseballs to start a minor league baseball game, and they would only send me just enough. So if there was a rain out game or the kind of game where we go through a lot of balls, I would just be scrounging. And then our pitching coach constantly, Alan Mills, he constantly wanted to get baseballs for his pitchers. So I'm constantly saying, oh, I can't give you baseballs. And people are understandably like, this is baseball, just give them to us. So I was just like constantly caught in the middle of that. And it culminated to a certain extent, this experience at the beginning of the second season, early preseason batting practice. I'm sitting in the dugout just watching, bullshitting with the trainer. And I see that there are a couple of kids in the stands hunting down. I just filled up our batting practice bucket with brand new pearls. There's something beautiful about a clean, brand new bucket of fresh baseballs. It's amazing. And whoever was at bat kept hitting balls into the stands, and these little kids were going and gathering them up. And I was like, oh shit, like I can't lose all of these baseballs. I need to get these back. Otherwise the Orioles are going to be pissed at me. I'm going to ask them for more baseballs. And so I went over into the stands and I looked at that one of the kids' stash of baseballs as he was off trying to get one in some other section. And I thought about, there's a split second where I thought about taking those baseballs and putting them in the BP bucket. And then I had to realize that I had that thought or that inclination, that I was literally standing there like I had some right to those baseballs that had been hit into the stands. And I was about to steal a ball from a little kid. And that realization, it put into focus this fact that I completely lost touch with the parts of the game that I loved, with that little kid version of myself. If I were in his shoes and some asshole who worked for the team came up into the stands and took my baseballs from me, I'd be like, what the it would be so egregious and so far outside any sort of written or unwritten rules in baseball. I'd be flabbergasted. And I was like, I'm that dude. And that shift, similar to the way that the shift of Matt Marullo coming in and having that mentality as the new manager shifted the tone of the clubhouse for the better, that realization shifted the tone in myself for the better, so that I started to recapture that that really fun, playful part of the game the rest of that season, where I started taking batting practice and I would travel with the team and I was just yucking it up with the guys. That was a really painful but important shift in that moment.
I like the scenes where you're in the cage with the guys, where you're shagging fly balls, or you're catching grounders. That whole journey from starting to do that, you getting more comfortable doing it. Because I think at first you kind of have some nerves, which I mean, I related so much in that moment too. I felt like they were the same nerves I had every time that I played baseball in high school.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I'm gonna mess up this throw. I'm gonna strike out this time. I'm gonna fail basically. And
Yes.
It's there with you every time you step on the field, and you write about it in this way that was so relatable. What was that experience like for you? Like, what were those feelings like? And then what got you to that place of comfort?
Yeah, there was that long time there's a moment in the first season where my dad asked me if I'd been on the field at all. And I was like, no. He said, if you're not doing any baseball stuff, then you may as well just be working in a hotel, just doing laundry, washing towels. And I was just like, Jesus, he's right. So yeah, I was apprehensive. I mean, shit, going to shag fly balls on a professional ball field when there's professional hitters hitting, and I haven't played baseball competitively in however many years. Yeah, I was nerve wracking. There's that shift inside of myself, but there was also this really inclusive part of the team where Alan Mills, our pitching coach, who I had a challenging relationship with, like we became something like friends, but we would bicker with each other and he would hassle me and all this kind of stuff. We would argue about things, but he was really good about trying to get me more involved with everything, to the point where he was the one who would throw me batting practice when I would go onto the field, and he might pump a fastball on the inside or drop a slider on the outside just to let me know what the situation really is here. But it doesn't change the fact that he's the one who got me out there and he's the one who was pitching to me. So it was really like, again, that clubhouse culture that made me feel like I was really part of the team. Because that's a big tension in the book, especially in the second part. Am I really a part of this, or am I just an observer? It's almost like asking myself in a really dramatic way. It's like asking myself, am I really the main character of my own life? Something like that. I don't know. It's like, do I deserve to be here at all? But once I realized that I did, that made it much easier to go out there and just fuck around and just have some fun.
Yeah. And baseball is a lot more fun when you're doing it that way.
Yeah. And maybe I hadn't realized this part until you asked me, but maybe a part of my ability to like actually go out there and get and have some fun was the realization after a year plus, it was really clear to me that I was not built for this. I was not built for competitive baseball. Having that realization made it easier for me to just go out there and have fun and realize that, oh, this isn't going to turn into anything. This is just me having a good time. Now, inevitably, there are those moments I was like, oh, I'm going to have my Rudy moments, but it would just be these flashes, you know?
I do like that about baseball, is that you can still, even at a non-professional level, have a Rudy moment, right? Like a diving catch is a beautiful thing to watch anybody do in some ways. And in a lot of games, somebody will do that. Somebody's going to hit a line drive that just looks really, is arcing through the air on this kind of glorious trajectory and kind of up there, the ball up there in the sky. All that happens in any kind of baseball.
For sure. And I think baseball is the only major American sport that an average person could step into and maybe succeed for once or twice. Like some schlub off the street can't go into an NHL hockey game and hold their own, most likely. NBA basketball game, no shot. NFL football, no shot. MLS soccer, no way. Major League Baseball, maybe.
Yeah.
You have the best odds of maybe doing something as a Rudy, some guy off the street.
Yeah. And that makes me think of how often that shows up in film and literature too, like movies like Rookie of the Year play with that story.
Yeah.
Do you have favorite baseball stories, books, films?
Probably Chad Harbach's The Art of Fielding.
Oh yeah, I love that book. I remember that. That's a great book.
Oh yeah. Henry Scrimshander, I believe the main character's name was.
Yeah.
But him getting the yips. He was he couldn't hit for anything, but he was this amazing fielder. And then all of a sudden he got the yips and couldn't throw the ball anymore. Loved that book. That's my favorite piece of baseball literature, I believe.
I'm with you there. I don't know if it's my favorite, but I'd forgotten about that book, and you mentioning it kind of brought it back. Yeah. I forgot that it was about the yips. So here's something I'm curious what your thoughts are on. We touched upon it a little bit. You said something earlier about the uniqueness of baseball in that it's this sport that the average person could experience success doing, just taking a step on the field from the street. What are some of the other ways that you've considered baseball as being different than other sports? I'm sure you've thought about that before. I feel like it's something all baseball people think about.
For sure. I mean, the biggest one, in my MFA program, one of my professors asked me why it seems that baseball lends itself to literary works more than any other major sport. And I think it's just such a contemplative game. It's just a function of how slow it is. It gives you a lot of time to think. And then a lot of time to think leads to something like the yips coming up, where it's too much thinking and too much anxiety. And I think the lack of speed, they call it the thinking man's game, but that lack of speed is what makes it so special. Like baseball, the actual game of baseball to me is one of the least important parts of baseball. It's what happens in the in-between, like the conversation between pitches and the catcher going to the mound, or like your dad teaches you something about the game at the stadium when the game isn't even going on. That's what seems so special to me about baseball. Whereas opposed to basketball, it's going so goddamn fast. It's like a race. Baseball is like a chess game.
The pitcher too is
I don't know that anybody would think about this consciously, but I think pitchers are one of the craziest positions on the field. Like left-handed relief pitchers are the most insane people you'll ever meet. And so they just lend themselves naturally to be characters.
What would your like kind of baseball sort of archetype be?
The archetype is the catcher, because the catcher has to be dumb enough to get behind the plate and just get their ass kicked by baseballs. But they also have to be smart enough to be able to manage the infield, manage the pitcher, and call the game. It's like they have to be exactly as stupid and as crazy as they are smart. That, I think, if I were looking at myself, that's my archetype.
Thanks, Greg, for coming on the show. Thanks for listening. If you're itching for more Clubbie stories, there's a link to Greg's website in our show notes where you can grab a copy of the book and find a bunch of deleted scenes that he's made available for free. Got an idea for something we should feature on a future episode of Sandlot Recommends? Send a message to the Sandlot Social Club podcast at gmail.com and tell us about it. You can also follow us on Instagram, Sandlot Social Club Podcast, for new episode teasers and even more sounds of Sandlot. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another new episode, so don't forget to subscribe. And until then, stay cool and keep playing ball.